Hey everyone, welcome to the Rising Light podcast with Brian and Melissa. I am Melissa. I work with my team of angels to help people clear what no longer serves them so they can so they can be closer to their higher self and move more into the ascension that's happening now, which is what we're going to talk about today.
I'm Brian. I call Melissa when I have questions, and and I'm also interested in this stuff too. We chatted a lot about the Ascension over the years. I feel like it started a long time ago, but we're just really feeling it ramp up in recent years. But yeah, so
Yeah.
topic that we've talked about before related to the other topics, but we figured we should dedicate an episode just to this because I think it might help make sense of some of the things that are going on right now that are causing a lot of confusion for people, and other people might be feeling a lot of kind of acceleration of energy and things moving in a more positive direction. So it's kind of interesting too how different people are experiencing the ascension in different ways.
Yeah, I agree. Should we start by just talking about what the ascension is? I feel like that would be a good place to start. And I'll say a couple things, and then I know you'll have a lot to contribute. um, but I'll just say my couple things. So I feel like the ascension is twofold. It's what we are individually ascending, and what the angels tell me is that the ascension is simply releasing what no longer serves so that you're able to be your true self of light and love. So you're not becoming someone new, you're becoming your true self before you had all this lower vibrational energy density on you, all your past life karma and all that sort of thing. So that is being that's what the ascension is for you individually. And then on a more global level, the earth is moving from 3D to 5D. And I think we're currently in 4D, both individually and kind of as a planet, I guess. Um, and 4D is where all this stuff is coming up for us, both individually and as a planet to clear. Um, all the Some people call it shadows. You know, it's your past trauma and that sort of thing that's coming up to the surface, and then we're seeing it again on a global level too.
And
um,
what is it about the ascension that causes all of that stuff to come up? Like why bring all of that to the surface?
well, bring it to the surface so it can be cleared. um, and because vibrations are rising, the old, if we just want to call it 3D matrix for lack of a better term, it can't hold that lower density and lower vibration, can't hold the higher vibration that's coming in, both within ourselves and again as a planet.
I've heard people talk about the lifting of the veil, it's what apocalypse translates to literally. And I think that is definitely the feeling I've had over especially the last couple of years, but even during COVID and prior to that, I just felt like you're kind of starting to see behind the mask with a lot of people, especially in politics and in society. You kind of started to see that there's a lot more going on beneath the surface than people realize, just in terms of like, I think before when people disagreed politically, sometimes there was more of a kind of sense of uh, like courtesy and rules of engagement. And then suddenly it seems like things have become so polarized that like all that's been thrown out the window. And now it's just there's a lot of vitriol and just it's a lot more contentious than it used to be. I think that's part of what we're seeing with this kind of awakening is like the things that were maybe hidden from us before, and also just a lot of the things that we had maybe hidden from ourselves or that we hadn't seen. Like you mentioned, some of the karmic clearing. And so even just I think like a lot of abilities that people have, like the true nature of who we are, is also being revealed more and more through, I think, the popularization of things that maybe seemed kind of weird. Like we were talking about how like yoga and meditation used to be kind of weird in a previous episode, and astrology, and now it's like there's a yoga studio, like in almost every city, and things like near-death experiences have become more common, and ESP, and people are talking a lot about that with the telepathy tapes and other, forms of media that are exploring this. So, and obviously YouTube and just tons of spiritual teachers and channelers. So I also think the positive side of it is we're seeing more of who we really are and our true nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many people here on the planet that are here to help. And they have, of course, spiritual abilities. So it's going to be more commonplace. Like you said, there's a yoga studio on every, or in every city. In some cities, it's like every corner.
Yeah.
And I've always said for years, like, how yoga used to kind of seem weird and out there to people. And like we're saying, it's so common now. I mean, now we're getting to the point where people are like, oh, talk to my energy healer today. It's going to become more and more normal. And even when I read comments in like on YouTube videos and stuff, it won't be anything spiritual. It might be an animal video or just someone being kind to another person or whatever. And people like be like, oh, they definitely knew each other in a past life, where
Yeah.
even when I was younger, that was not, Shirley MacLaine talked about it and people thought she was a wackadoo.
Yeah.
So yeah, all this spiritual stuff is really definitely becoming more of the norm now. And you also mentioned like the political divide and how it seemed to be that we used to be able to have our different opinions but still get along, and now it's very like kind of cutthroat and black and white. And I just did a channeled message for that I posted on here, and one of the things that angels wanted me to say is, can you accept someone else's political opinion? Accept them. Just realize that I think, like had a different upbringing, just believe different things, um, and so that even something like that is part of you ascending, right? Being able to do that, and that divide that it seems that something else wants us to have, that isn't going to be able to, by something else, I mean, whatever it is, like, right, the bigger governmental structure or whatever,
Yep.
that's going to have to, that's not going to be supported in the 5D either. Like right now, the media, whoever you want to blame it on, is making it us against them, right? You're right, the other person is wrong. So the angels really want us to try to let go of some of that.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of that feels very manufactured, like a kind of divide and conquer strategy, which I think has probably
Mhm.
been happening for many, many, many decades or centuries. And I think it's also maybe worth mentioning too that with that, and I think because people are so heavily identified with their, political affiliation or just, their stance on different issues, that there's also the phenomenon of ascension madness that some people experience too, where the heightened energy actually leads to a kind of instability within people or sometimes even within entire societies. And I think that's kind of why it feels like everything is going crazy right now, and that we're witnessing the downfall of society in some ways. I know it sounds kind of, like kind of negative, but I will reframe this later because I think that there's a way of looking at this that's actually very positive. But the experience that people have of like a feeling of like my whole world is collapsing. I'm feeling lost and confused, which even I feel confused in a lot of ways about what's going on. Although I feel like there's also the sort of acknowledgement that like we can't necessarily make sense of things right now because we don't see beyond the tip of the iceberg. But so I think there's a way of like surrendering to not knowing as well, which I think it helps with that. But for a lot of people, I think it's a really disorienting experience. And then some people experience it as almost like a psychosis, like they can't um, come to terms with the direction things are moving and this kind of like heightened feeling of like all this stuff's coming to the surface. And it's kind of shocking. I think even some things are really horrifying that people are seeing. And I think that's the other side of the ascension, which is like you were talking about earlier, like all that stuff coming to the surface for people to see. And I asked, like, why is that happening? Kind of knowing in some ways that I think in order for us to choose to not live in that world anymore, we have to see what world we're living in order to make a choice. You have to see what your options are. And I think, unfortunately, like the seeing of the things that were previously unconscious to us in some ways, or at least we only saw, kind of, like I said, kind of the tip of the iceberg, is now being like fully revealed more and more. And I think that is causing a lot of people to feel like it's disillusionment. Like you suddenly realize that like you were living in an illusion before, and now you're seeing reality. And now it's like, oh, how do we move on from some of the things that we're seeing that, some of it is saddening. I think there's a lot of things that as we see what's, kind of been happening beneath our feet that, it does have the effect of like kind of making us realize that there was a lot of darkness and now there's also a lot of just extreme light and positivity, and that it just seems like more, it's like they're becoming more extreme. And that's why I think it's
Mhm.
kind of interesting because like you would think the ascension would be more and more positive, but I think it's actually like more and more extreme polarization, and eventually there'll be reconciliation. I think obviously the light will win in the end, love win. The ascension I think is just moving from power and control to compassion. It's almost like moving up from one chakra to another, like the solar plexus is like all about control, moving up to the heart chakra. I feel like we're kind of making that leap from a world kind of structured around control, keeping people under control, to one that's rooted in compassion and emanating from the heart.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what you're right. That's what the ascension is. It's moving into the heart center. And instead of making choices out of fear, which many people do, even though they don't realize they're doing it a lot of times, and instead listening to your heart. And so, yeah, when you're in that space, you're definitely more compassionate. Like you said, it's really important to be kind and compassionate to yourself too, and just really follow those messages that are coming from your heart. And I wanted to say one other thing based on something that you said. Like when I first started talking, I mentioned how the ascension is kind of twofold, like it's happening to us individually and then just the planet and globally. But our micro decisions, like being kinder to ourselves, listening to our heart, um, those affect things on the macro, right? Because if a million people or more are making those heart based decisions, it's they're going to be at a higher frequency, and then these other bad things that we're talking about that are coming to the light now, they're they can't they can't exist in that higher frequency. So it's not just about this the planet itself becoming a higher frequency, whether that's from like the solar flares and stuff that are happening, or just where we're, and we'll talk about all this on a more, or where we are in that cycle, going from Pisces to Aquarian age. um, but it's also based on our decisions as individuals. If we're going to be choose to be kind to ourselves and one another, or if we're going to keep up that uh, you're right or I'm right, you're wrong kind of mentality.
For sure. Yeah, you mentioned being kind to ourselves and to other people as, good advice to take during this time. And it got me thinking too about, the content of our consciousness and how, like as microcosms of the kind of consciousness of the planet and even, kind of universal consciousness that we're contributing to that. And so it's also a time to maybe be more discerning about what we allow into our consciousness. Obviously, like I said before, there might be things that come up that we find disturbing. Um, Probably there's some value in knowing kind of in a general sense of what's been going on, but to not dwell on that and definitely, not focus on things that are going to pull you down emotionally and energetically. And to me, the things that kind of come to mind are like violence as entertainment, or even just violence as like curiosity, because I think, with a lot of just things that have been disclosed lately, some of it, is a bit horrifying. And so like to not sort of go deeply into those things. I actually didn't really realize the effect that some of that would have, and so I was kind of curious, as I was learning about like kind of what's going on, and I did read some things that I found pretty disturbing, and then I just decided after that I'm like I'm not gonna like look into the details of any of this stuff. It's more like good that people know some of the things that are maybe happening with our leadership, like the people who've been in power over many decades and centuries, but not necessarily going into like all the details about like stuff that's been happening. I think that can make a person feel like there's no good in the world. And so I think like just being really discerning about what you allow into your consciousness and focusing more on the things that uplift you. And so for me, like a lot of that is spiritual teachings and even just reading about like the stuff we talk about, like animal communication and ESP and near-death experiences. Those have a very uplifting effect for me because I think they show us that our consciousness is not confined to the body, and so it's not, we're not like who we really are is never threatened in any way, because our body can be attacked, but how do you attack consciousness if it's not, tied to the body, and so I think, there's an aspect of us that's formless, and so can't be destroyed, can't be threatened. And that's like one of the teachings in A Course in Miracles, actually, that they describe at the very beginning as the entire course can be summed up as nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists, and herein lies the peace of God. I think that idea of like our essence, we're starting to move more and more away from form and towards essence, like this kind of materialist worldview, more to a spiritual one where we see, the essence of things, we feel the essence. And I think that's part of the movement to this heart-centeredness is we feel things more than we try to think about them and understand them intellectually. So it's more about like how things make us feel. So when I say like discernment, like how does something make you feel and be hyper vigilant about like if something pulls you down energetically and maybe not allowing that into your consciousness because that's going to be reflected in the world around you. I think that's the thing we have to be careful about now is just that like we're creating the world around us, we're co-creating maybe is a better term, and that we should each be trying to contribute something positive to that if we're serious about it.
Yeah, absolutely. In my Sovereign Heart program, that's one of the modules we talk about is and I just mentioned it in that channeling I did the other day too, is what are you consuming? And through everything you're consuming, like feel or ask yourself, is this hurting or helping? Like, is this raising my vibration? Do I feel better when I'm watching this, or is it lowering my vibration? And if it's not helping, like there's really no reason to watch it. You don't need to know anything. I mean, the main thing is like I keep saying, just focus on your heart center and being in your heart. If something like I stopped watching the news, I don't know, like a decade ago or more, I don't even know. But I was like, if something is big enough that I need to know, someone will tell me. Like, um, yeah. So is it
Yeah.
hurting or helping?
Yep. So, which, having gotten all that out of the way, we sort of talked about some of the things that are coming up that, we're sort of experiencing as like, feels kind of negative or kind of a pull on our emotions. I think, that we're sort of in the middle of it right now. Like we're kind of in this like storm where everything is being shaken up. And when I said it seems like we're witnessing the downfall of society, this is one of the things that I think when we were talking about the shift in astrological ages, that when you kind of see that like this is actually part of a cycle where these systems of the previous age at the end of that age start to deconstruct. And so we're seeing a lot of the systems of the age of Pisces, which was an age of duality, but also kind of the risk factor for Pisces is it gets caught up in illusions. And so uh, thinking you're living in a world that actually doesn't really exist. And then Aquarius is kind of the it's the water bear, so it like brings the contents of what was unconscious to the surface. So now we get to see everything that was hidden from us. The risk factor with Aquarius is actually it's kind of a lack of emotional connection because it's an air sign and it kind of rules technology. So I think like with the age of Aquarius, the thing that people maybe need to be aware of is just like our over reliance on technology, maybe. So it's something to kind of keep in mind because the age of Pisces actually was an age of compassion. You know, it was kind of the age of love your enemies, turn the other cheek, you know, those kinds of teachings. But just that with every age, there's some aspect that needs to be kind of kept in mind so that, you know, like the age of Aquarius, I think it's because the opposite of Aquarius is Leo, and Leo rules the heart. It's like a need to kind of maintain that heart-centeredness. And so I think the age of Aquarius will bring its own challenges, but I think ultimately though, because it rules friendship, it's kind of it creates a level playing field. And I think this human pyramid that we've been living in is the thing that we're seeing uh, kind of deconstructing. So the nice thing is that it seems that the world we're going to be moving into is one that's going to benefit all of society versus just the people at that top of that hierarchy. So I think that in a lot of ways, there's just a lot to look forward to um, because it seems like each age kind of builds on the last one and improves things. And then, you know, not that there won't be challenges, but we're moving into an age of a higher degree of compassion. And actually, David Hawkins talked about this that in I think it was 1987 there was the harmonic resonance where there's all these like different rituals that happened around the world like in Stonehenge, and that was supposedly the point at which humanity moved from there's like a tipping point in his what he calls the scale of consciousness or map of consciousness where there's a point between the emotions or states of consciousness that require energy, like you have to feed it, like, you know, anger, it pulls energy away from you, pride pulls energy away from you. And once you cross into the states of emotion that he associates with power, the ones below being force, he actually has a book called Power versus Force. So when you move from the level of force, which is kind of characterized by, like I said, kind of like requiring energy from you, whether it's like physical energy or psychological energy, to the level of power, which actually is driven by the energy of life. So you're kind of carried, it becomes more and more effortless. He said that humanity crossed that threshold in 1987, and that's actually what led to the fall of the Iron Curtain. So like the fall of the Soviet Union. And that was something that Nostradamus had predicted would not happen. He was kind of, I haven't actually gone into all of his predictions, but I know that we shifted timelines basically, according to Hawkins. And so humanity won't ultimately destroy itself. And that, you know, we have continued to kind of ascend ever since. I think during COVID, though, it kind of lowered again a little bit, but because of the heightened level of fear there. And I think that was maybe, who knows? I mean, either a coincidence or something that could have been intentional, but ultimately, I think even the effect that's had is kind of lifting the veil even further, you know, so we're seeing more and more into, you know, the fact that a lot of this stuff, like you were saying, is meant to keep us in a state of fear.
Yeah, and I also think there so there's people who are choosing not to be here on the planet for the ascension. So some are choosing to pass away, like they already chose, right? Um, and so sometimes when we have these big things that happen where a lot of people uh, pass away, it could be because of that, right? And people who are staying here, not everyone is choosing to ascend, which is fine. Some people, so eventually, I'm going to back up a little bit. So eventually, with this ascension, I don't know that it's going to happen in our lifetime, but we're going to get out of the karmic path and get on the dharmic path. Some of us are already on the dharmic path or really close to it. I mean, whatever, that doesn't matter. Most of us are on the most people are on the karmic path. But so eventually, after this ascension or as we go through it, the point is to get on the dharmic path. But some people want to stay on the karmic path and just learn that way. Um, so those people aren't necessarily ascending, which is fine. And then there's people who are kind of in the middle where they are ascending but aren't really aware of it, right? They don't follow anything spiritually, but they're still learning and growing and working on themselves. And then there's people who are here to help with the ascension. And so those people are definitely going through it. I think those are the main kind of camps.
Well, it's interesting because someone once asked another channeler I follow, like, how do you know if you're ascending? Like, how do you know if you're moving into the new earth? Because you mentioned like some people aren't ascending. And he said it's actually really simple. It's, are you compassionate more than 50% of the time? Like, so is it like 51%? He basically said like there's a way like they can measure energy in a person. We don't really,
Mhm.
at least as far as I know, have that ability. So for us, it might be more of like getting a general sense of like, are we more of a do we show compassion towards, especially like a weaker life form, like a weaker person, weaker creature, or do we want to exploit that? You know, like I said, it's like control versus compassion. And in a lot of parts of the world, a weaker life form is viewed as like something to prey upon. And in other parts of the world, it's more common to show compassion towards weakness. And supposedly, like I mentioned, the harmonic resonance in the 80s, supposedly also the end of the Mayan calendar in 2012 was another tipping point. And what I'd heard about that particular moment in time is that was the tipping of the scales where there were more people on the planet who were willing to show compassion towards a weaker being than there were people who would want to exploit that weakness. And so more love on the energy on the planet than uh, fear or, like basically more positive energy than negative. And so that was another tipping point. And so it's kind of interesting how a lot of this just has to do with like, are you generally a kind person, a compassionate person? That's kind of how you'll know.
We need to be careful there because there's a lot of, we don't want to be kind because we think we should. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
Like if I
oh,
do this, then I'll ascend kind of a thing. Like
right.
you're just trying to
That,
achieve it.
and even just like it, I mean, I'm just going to keep repeating myself. It always, like, if it doesn't feel in your heart like you should help someone, then you shouldn't, right? But if you feel that in your heart to help that person, then you should. You see, like,
Oh yeah.
okay, um,
Well, like, I mean, a lot of people have family members maybe that take advantage of their kindness. So it's not that a person isn't kind, but obviously like when you have maybe a family member who's
you
like,
still have to set boundaries,
yeah, exactly. So
and if you're not speaking your truth, which might be something you have to say that's not necessarily kind or not helping them in some way, you're not helping them. You're not helping yourself and you're not helping them because they may need to learn a lesson. And they might, and you speaking your truth might help them to learn that lesson. Um, so, yeah, I don't think it's just a blanketed be kind um, and you're ascending. Um, but I mean, I get what you're saying. If you're, I mean, yeah, compassion, being compassionate does come into it. Um, I think most people that are here, kind of like the middle people or the um, people are here to help, are probably already compassionate people in in some ways. But then I think part of what you were getting at is, can you also be compassionate? And this is where I think some growth needs to happen, or not needs, but is happening, is can you be compassionate to your enemy, right? Can you love your enemy? Can you be kind when you're bringing that truth you're speaking of? Can you do it in a kind and loving way? So I think that is like the discernment, um, in my view. And then I
Sure.
also wanted to mention, ascending is a big part of that, is doing the healing we need to do, right? The healing from past lives. It doesn't, you don't need to know, oh, this was a past life thing, so I need to heal it, but it's going to show up in this life, stuff that happened in your childhood. Um, yeah, we need we need to do healing on that in order to ascend. That's what the angel's talking about, releasing that, letting go of that lower vibrational energy that's stuck to us from this lifetime and past lifetimes.
For sure. Yeah. And I guess that kind of speaks to the fact that like in order to heal others, a person has to have healed themselves too. So it kind of has this kind of effect of like, kind of exponentially increasing the level of compassion because the more people who are healing are, that's also helping to feed into the acceleration of the ascension and, this kind of move towards compassion, which is, I think, starting to feel it more and more. I definitely feel like there's just less of a tolerance for things that are out of alignment with that. And that's why I think certain things I think are just becoming, like unacceptable to people now that maybe previously they just kind of accepted as a fact of life, like violence and cruelty towards people, sometimes it's like police violence, sometimes it's, violence, from protesters and things like that. I think there's just a lot of that is, I think, being scrutinized more and yeah, so and even just probably a lot of like entertainment and things like that. I know I'm kind of that way with like you were saying how you stopped watching the news. I feel like I'm kind of that way with like watching entertainment because I actually think that the real world is way more interesting than anything I could watch in, a movie or a TV show. So a lot of that stuff has just become a lot less interesting. And I felt like we were kind of moving into this era where everyone was an anti-hero, and I just found it harder and harder to kind of like the characters and TV shows and things. They all kind of seemed like, not necessarily very likable people. So, so yeah, even stuff like that, I think people are just becoming more disillusioned with, what's being presented as like entertainment too. And I think even just psychologically, there's something to be said for the fact that, you know, part of the ascension is becoming more empowered. And I think it's like taking power over your own life and also, in some ways like saying, like this is what I want the world to look like. And if, and if you're not, uh, I don't know, if you're not active in that way, I think for example, I think that for a long time, people have been conditioned into thinking that it's normal to just sort of sit in a comfortable room like on their couch and watch violence, and that's like a passive form of entertainment. And I think the effect that's had psychologically is people have become more passive towards violence in the world around them. And I think that we've had to undo that conditioning, for one, by not watching violent entertainment. I think a lot of people have kind of come to that conclusion that that's really not good for the psyche. I think the psyche has a hard time distinguishing between what's on a screen and what's real, given like the way people sometimes react viscerally to, like fake violence in movies and TV shows. And so I think I think a move towards like people becoming less passive. And I know I was kind of that way until COVID. I think something about that made me feel like I should probably get involved in some things that are going on to try to help, steer things away from this kind of what I felt was like, a world that was becoming more and more uh, sort of caught up in illusions and kind of false narratives and things like that. So I think that is another thing too, where feel like people are becoming more active in the world as well that maybe were previously passive because, society kind of this kind of a thing that people are conditioned into.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to, what we were saying earlier about choosing what to watch, and is this raising my vibration or is it lowering it? And you'll know immediately by the way you feel.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like this is something we could probably talk another hour on, but I think we should wrap it up. I mean, based on the time. Any final thoughts or anything? You
Well,
don't need to.
I'll mention one thing, which is that
Okay.
uh, I heard a really great analogy for what's going on, which is that what's happening right now is kind of like someone writing an essay and then accidentally deleting it. And then there's that like, oh shit moment, like you've just lost everything that you had. And then you rewrite it and you realize like what you had come up with in the rewriting of it was actually much better than what you had before. And I've heard channelers talk about how we're kind of in that oh shit moment right now. Like everything that we had, we're starting to see is like disappearing, like things that we
Mhm.
sort of took for granted. But the thing to remember is that what's going to come out of this is going to be much better than what we had before. And so even though we're kind of in like the middle of the storm right now, that we should remember that this is all leading towards a more compassionate, loving world. And, it's the things that we're still clinging to, or a lot of people are still clinging to, are not things that are going to um, be able to coexist in this new world, the things that are out of alignment with that. So I think there's a lot to look forward to. And I think, even though we're living in a really chaotic time right now, ultimately we'll be on the other side of this eventually. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind too, is this is all temporary.
Yeah, and it's all too how you look at it, and again, what you're bringing into your world by what you're consuming, who you choose to hang out with. Because I see life right now is very wonderful and so many kind people, and so it's just what do you want to choose? What are you choosing, basically? So, and I mean, I know I'm not diminishing or belittling if people are going through a hard time. I'm not saying there aren't hard times or they're choosing it, but we can choose our reactions to things, of course. And are we seeing it as a a way to grow, something we need to learn and grow from, or are we going to be angry about it? And I'm not saying either is right or wrong, but there's the choice. And sorry, I thought of one other thing while you were talking. I know, like, I don't know how many years ago. I don't know if they're still saying it, but a lot of people were talking about the new Earth, right? Like we're going to go through this ascension, and there's going to be two Earths, basically. And at first, people were like seeing that as literal, like. But of course, I mean, from what I understand, it's just the people who are choosing not to ascend are staying here, and the people who are ascending are staying. But it's like, and it's not that our paths are never going to cross like at a grocery store or something, but it's almost like if you're ascending, the people who aren't ascending are just kind of fading in the background. And some people might see that already, like, right, friendships are changing, like you're like, oh, this person, and not in a judging way, but you're at a different frequency, so it doesn't resonate to call them anymore or whatever. And it can even happen in like in a work situation, um, where maybe they used to bother you. Maybe they're not ascending, but because you are, you're able to let it go and that sort of thing. But
Yeah, you'll wonder, where did that person go? Whatever happened to
right,
them?
yeah, yeah, I know it's happening in my life for sure, and yeah, so it's interesting, um, and yeah, I do need to go, but one thing that might be fun to explore is like how does that look when someone's married, right? And one person's ascending and one person isn't, and obviously a number of things can happen, but
Yeah, seems like that marriage might ultimately dissolve. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that are just realizing, like they're not a frequency match anymore, or maybe they were initially. So, and that's pretty normal too. I mean, people are uh, kind of evolving at different rates. And ultimately, I think everyone ascends in the end. I mean, whether or not people are choosing to right now or not, I don't think there's any avoiding it in the end. I think it's just a matter of like when the person chooses to. So
Well, what do you mean? Like in this lifetime, or they're going to at least in another lifetime?
in another lifetime,
Okay, yeah.
yeah, or
Yeah.
many lifetimes later, I think it's just this is
Yeah,
I've
we're
heard it described
all yeah, no, we're all on our way back, I would call it to source, like our where we came from. We're all kind of going up this ladder, so to speak. Um, yes, in when I say talk about people that are choosing to stay on the karmic path, they're and I may have said, yeah, they're choosing not to ascend as we are because they're choosing this more dense uh, world, this more dense life. But yeah, that doesn't mean they're not also growing and going up this ladder. Yeah.
Yeah, and another analogy I've heard, I know we're trying to wrap this up, but it's just that the further a person moves into darkness, the faster and further they're propelled towards the light, kind of like a rubber band that's stretched to the extreme in one direction, goes hurtling in the other direction. So I think there's even some value for the people that really embrace the darkness, the idea like it's better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. The people that are really stuck here feeling like, this is what they want to suppress, that compassionate aspect, the light within themselves. They want to embrace the darkness. Like I think even there's, we can't judge that soul's path because there could be some value there in staying in extreme darkness and maybe a heightened appreciation for the light once they do return to source again. So
Well, yeah, I think this is a whole that's a whole nother topic, but I think we need to be careful and maybe again another topic, but what's the exact definition of your talking about darkness because they might not necessarily come out of that. So I think, but yeah, I think that's another topic for another day. So
to be continued.
yeah. All right.
Well, it's always a pleasure chatting, and yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic. I think something that we're just going to have to see it all unfold. I think it's hard to really know how this is all going to play out, but I think it's exciting to it's like watching a movie in a way. Like I said, I don't watch movies anymore, but this is like watching one with a lot of plot twists.
Yeah, it is super exciting. And how far we're going to get in this lifetime, like our lifetime, who knows? But I'm excited about it. I have been for years, and yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, it is all good. Well, great. Well, thanks again, Melissa. Always a pleasure.
Oh yeah,
And
thank
thank you
you.
all. We'll chat again soon.
Okay, bye everyone.